It was at the end of July, just a couple of days before this past SummerSlam weekend, when I finally decided to stop covering current WWE, and by extension, I guess in the interest of fairness, to stop covering all modern wrestling. I was getting tired of the long and late hours with more and more events I had to try and keep up with, making my work-life balance even more difficult to maintain, all while exposing myself to an increasingly negative and hostile and tribalistic fan base on both sides of the coin. The product didn't do it for me anymore. The discourse was getting way too toxic. This part of the job was no longer any fun for me. I was getting exhausted having to try and give takes and pretend to care about something I didn't anymore. So I said, enough is enough. And let me tell you guys something. I am the happiest I have been in months after doing this. I'm having way more fun covering an objectively awful time period from 16 years ago than I've had all year trying to keep up with the modern stuff. You know, you should all give this a try. Fans, YouTubers, all you. Just stop watching the current stuff for a bit, take some time off social media, and you will revitalize your love of professional wrestling. It'll make you realize just how little the shit like, oh, did you hear what Mercedes Moné did? Or, oh, did you hear what Blake Monroe said? Or, oh, did you see the size of the ring this week? How none of it fucking matters. Now, I know a lot of you have asked me about this, but just because I'm not covering the current stuff for the time being doesn't mean I haven't had my ear on the ground. Doesn't mean there wasn't going to be these year-end countdowns. Because hey, I'm more motivated to put them out now than before. This week, on the last day of the year, I'm gonna rank them, my picks for the top 16 worst things about wrestling in 2025. Spoiler alert, if you don't like to hear me complain about WWE, you're not gonna like this video. Now, AEW, far from perfect this year. They had some problems, but let's just say that watching them this year didn't make me want to hate wrestling. Let's begin. Number 16, the fall of the super indie. Full disclosure, I work for one of the two companies I'm about to mention here, so this one does hit a little close to home. But truly, the closure of two of America's hottest and most accessible independent leagues should make all fans a little sad. Within the span of a month, Prestige Wrestling and Deadlock Pro both declared that they would be closing their doors. At the time of this recording, DPW has just held their final US event, while Prestige's last show is set for this coming February. Now, if you live outside the indie wrestling bubble, or if you're one of those wrestling fans who doesn't believe in the indies or something, these names might not mean much to you. But to a lot of fans, it's the closing of two huge gateways to wrestling's present and future. For me, being part of Prestige has meant being lucky enough to witness the journeys of some of wrestling's greatest unsung heroes on their way to national fame. Stars of AEW, TNA, and Japan, a litany of living legends. Prestige Wrestling has given me the chance to sharpen my commentary skills on some of the best matches of any given year, alongside the greatest young voice in the game today in Jordan Castle, who I know is going to carry this mention as a badge of honor until the day he dies. But more importantly, Prestige and DPW gave all that awesome action to the fans, from the local names to the indie guys with internet cred, to bona fide TV talent, to the international stars, and to all the memories made. The closure of these two companies, who turned so many fans onto some amazing wrestling, is the end of a run that was something very special. Now, obviously, the indies themselves are far from dead. There are plenty of places everywhere you look. I mean, here on the West Coast, we've got POW, DOA, we have Defy, we've got West Coast Pro, we've got Hood Slam. There are millions of places across this country of ours for wrestlers to ply their craft and for fans to see it. But as far as regional indies with production, with reach, with connections, and with a budget, those are becoming fewer and farther between at the moment. That isn't to say we won't eventually have another indie resurgence, but Prestige and DPW's closures could spell the beginning of a sad short-term future for this level of the business. But while we're on the subject, if you're a wrestling promoter in need of a commentator, in person or remote, you know who to get a hold of. Number 15, the Wyatt Six. After feuding with Chad Gable and American Made for most of their existence last year, the Wyatt Six spent the first half of 2025 out of the picture due to an injury to Bo Dallas. They finally came back in May of this year and soon after won the tag team titles, then pivoted to a lengthy feud with the MFTs that involved lots of standing around and looking scary, finally wrapping up over the tag titles just weeks ago. You know, maybe it's just not for me, because sure, I can understand the good intentions behind it, but what is the point of the Wyatt Six? I mean, yeah, they had a great debut last year, and now they show up, they stand around, they say spooky things. It's a great production, but it leaves me standing there going, so what? Where's the arc? Where's the evolution? What's the end game, and how will they fit into this world long term? I liked the late Bray Wyatt, but much like the group's namesake, Uncle Howdy and friends leave a lot to be desired in the places where it counts and where the next steps take them. Number 14, MJF's creative. The problem with being really good at a young age is the risk of running out of your best material early on. Maxwell Jacob Friedman is a very talented individual who has constantly proven himself in the ring and on the microphone. But from one Jew to another, Max Booby, this matzah's getting a little stale. Let me get this out of the way now. His stuff with Mystico this year was freaking sweet, easily his strongest stuff all year. When it comes to his in-ring work, I have no complaints, but creatively speaking, most of what's happened with him stateside in 2025 has felt really lacking compared to what's come before. After losing a transitional rivalry to the recently turned heel but is pretty much already a face again Hangman Page, Max spent months trying to get into the good graces of the Hurt Syndicate. The angle had some fun moments, but lacked a decent payoff when MJF was abruptly kicked out of the group and never interacted with them again. He feuded with and lost to Mark Briscoe, predictably getting most of his heat by invoking the name of Mark's late brother Jay. And just days before I recorded this video, Friedman came back from his most recent hiatus to insert himself into the three-man world title picture at World's End, which seems counterintuitive for an opportunistic heel. And aside from his hairline, he's pretty much the same guy he was at the beginning of the year. His year did end on a higher note than I expected, but I still think 2025 was his weakest year in AEW. I feel like you have to move on from that wannabe cool edgelord shtick by now. And if you still don't believe me, how about this? Number 13, Jeff Jarrett's last ride. There was a period of time early this year when AEW was way too reliant on the older guard. Guys like Adam Copeland, Christian Cage, Samoa Joe, and Chris Jericho, all fine individually and in small doses, but with all of them taking up TV time, it was getting a little ridiculous. But then Jeff Jarrett said, "Hey, my turn." At the start of the year, Double J addressed a live Dynamite crowd and announced he'd signed his final wrestling contract with the goal of getting one more crack at a world championship. I do think over the last few years, the public opinion on Jarrett has softened a lot from where it was. You know, more people these days are appreciative of him and he can still go, so what's the harm? Thank goodness for the aforementioned MJF to bring everyone back to reality. In one of the earliest chapters of Jarrett's story, Maxwell confronted the legend and the two had an all-time bad promo off. MJF went for the usual low-hanging fruit by referencing Owen Hart, while the Last Outlaw seemed to forget he was the babyface and tried beating Friedman at his own game. It was not a great look for either man. MJF even went so far as to say in that promo that any young company Jarrett is involved with tends to die. Why would you say that to him in the young company you're also in? After that, I don't think anyone wanted to see a matchup less, especially Tony Khan apparently, as Jarrett's big comeback story was instantly scrapped, possibly one of the fastest creative turnarounds in AEW's short history. I'm sure Double J expected it to go longer, and if the circumstances were a bit different, it might have had a chance. But this was just a case of B-A-double-D, ha-ha, T-I-double-M, ho-ho, I-double-N, timing, case of bad timing. Number 12, Jelly Roll. I feel like this entry does not need an explanation, but that is a bit of a cop-out, so I'll be as brief as possible. Celebrities and social media stars getting involved in wrestling matches. I've made it known they aren't always the worst things in the world. I believe there are times and places for these moments, but I also believe that some folks are more qualified to do it than others. Say younger individuals with athletic backgrounds, or even former professional wrestlers. But having a 41-year-old musician whose name is Jelly Roll in a top storyline for SummerSlam on the basis of, duh, he's famous, feels that the writing team spun a wheel or threw a dart to get to this point. I'm glad that he took to it so well, and that everyone was happy with how it went, and that training for the match helped him get in better shape, and that he so graciously pitched that he be the one to take the fall. But is this the best that this crack creative squad can come up with for Drew McIntyre? Who or what is this for aside from social media managers? I know it's an age-old complaint, but come on, aren't there plenty of other actual wrestlers who could have benefited from that time? I can think of a few. Number 11. Hot wrestlers get cooled down. One of the biggest issues people have had with AEW over the years is that far too often we'd see a new face debut only to be sporadically used afterward. It's a natural consequence of their roster being so big. Well, it turns out that when the shoe's on the other foot, WWE's got their own large roster problem. This year's success rate for AEW to WWE wrestlers has been mixed depending on where they landed. While Ricky Saints, Ethan Page, and Blake Monroe have all done well for themselves on NXT, it was honestly disappointing to see how the most recent All Elite imports did on the main roster this year. As of press time, neither of the Lucha Brothers are any better off than they were by the end of their AEW runs, but at least Penta's got a cool presentation. Then there are guys like Rusev and Aleister Black, a couple of Triple H's faves who seemingly spent the majority of their AEW deals just itching to come back home. But in a shocking twist, both of those guys are currently just as lost in the mix as they were before. At least Black has been paired up with his real-life wife in Zelina Vega, perhaps for no better reason than to prove a point to Karrion Kross and Scarlett. Triple H's style of booking is great when it comes to first impressions. Debuts, turns, entrances, first matches, that sort of thing. But far too often this year, we have seen things falter in the second and third chapters. And considering the glacial pace at which the main event scene there moves, you can expect the mid-card to be at a similar speed for years to come. Number 10. R-Truth's release, return, revamp, and regression. I'm going to talk a lot about the retirement of John Cena later in this countdown, but there lies within it a subchapter so frustrating in its complete lack of necessity that I had to address it on its own. It's so weird seeing WWE report record profits and record gates and to see TKO stock ever rising, yet wouldn't you know it, every year they still have to cut tons of wrestlers over budget reasons. This year was particularly brutal for queer women and people of color for some reason, but perhaps no release was more surprising or controversial than R-Truth's. There were a lot of reasons for fans and wrestlers to be shocked when Truth announced on social media his deal was expiring. He had just wrestled a newly healed John Cena on Saturday night's main event. But more than that, he was considered a lifer, one of the company's most beloved performers. You're telling me TKO doesn't have room in the coffers for someone like him? The bean counters in the company saw Truth as a line item, an expense that could be cut to help their stock price, but they greatly underestimated the tidal wave of support that not only came from fans, but from Truth's fellow workers. The fans would chant, "We want Truth" at shows and use the hashtag on social media. The backlash was so severe, WWE had no choice but to listen. At Money in the Bank, Truth shocked the world when he stormed the ring and cost Cena and Logan Paul their match against Cody Rhodes and Jey Uso. And it was soon announced that Truth got his job back. When asked to elaborate on the about-face, the H-Man smugly implied it was all part of a master plan, all part of the show, a response to mask the fact they absolutely did not expect this egg on their face. That Monday, Truth got on the live mic, cut his hair, and declared himself under his real name of Ron Killings for like a month before he went right back to being his silly, goofy self from before. Because deep down, that's what we all really wanted, apparently. If the mark of a good booker is being able to capitalize on real-life controversy and turn it into a money-making angle, then Paul Levesque absolutely whiffed on this. Either they made a mistake in letting the wrong guy go, course-corrected, and chose not to capitalize further, or they cooked themselves up a very convincing warped shoot that created lots of discourse and absolutely failed to follow up on it. Instead of trying something new for a change, they just went back to what was safe and easy for everyone. Obviously, nothing they can do with this buzz. I will say this though, at least WWE listened to the audience. I mean, I can't remember an about-face on a release that took place this quickly before. So kudos to everyone involved who helped Truth get paid again. Honestly, it's a tactic that does not work for everybody. Number 9. WWE spams the counter button. For WWE, fucking with the little guy is a time-honored tradition going back all the way to the mid-1980s. Now, Vince McMahon may have stopped trying after the Wednesday Night War, but once Triple H and TKO took over, the fucking with has increased tenfold. It began simply enough when NXT Battleground ran against Double or Nothing in May, but then WWE really ramped it up on the weekend of All In that July, running not only NXT's Great American Bash, but also the Saturday night's main event that would feature Goldberg's retirement match. Oh yeah, they also brought back Evolution for the first time in 7 years the night afterward, and that was okay, I guess. They did it again in August when Heatwave went up against Forbidden Door, and then in October, WWE brought back the WrestlePalooza name for their ESPN debut and just happened to schedule it the same night as All Out. They pulled out all the stops for that one, including getting AJ Lee out of retirement to soften the blow of Brock Lesnar destroying John Cena again. Now sure, in this capitalist utopia we live in, WWE is well within their rights to book the shows whenever they want, even on the same days as AEW. And the wrestling fans have their choice to watch these shows in whatever order and whatever time they want in this crazy digital streaming age we live in. That being said, the amount of times WWE has been doing it this year is pretty sad. It's almost like they're compensating for something. If the goal of all the repeated dick-waving was to hurt AEW's numbers, I'm not sure they accomplished that either. For instance, All In this year earned one of the company's highest buy rates ever, while the main event with Goldberg vs. Gunther drew about 500,000 fewer folks than the previous installment. The higher-ups at WWE have indicated they are far from done with the counter-programming tactics, so expect more busy weekends in the months to come. But it comes off as petty and unnecessary in the 2020s as it did in the 1980s. Folks, we're halfway through the list. What do you think of it so far, and what are your picks for the worst of 2025? Be sure to let me know in the comments section. Number 8. The Vision of Creative Karma. A wise man once said, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, we can't get fooled again." But WWE tried fooling people too often this year, including the boys themselves, and in my opinion, it kind of cost them. On the aforementioned edition of Main Event, Seth Rollins apparently injured his knee during a match with LA Knight. Knight pinned the Money in the Bank holder, but the big story was work or shoot. We all got our answer on night 1 of SummerSlam when Rollins threw down his crutches and cashed in the briefcase on an exhausted CM Punk to once again become world champion. Ooh, that trickster Rollins pulling off basically the same thing he did a decade earlier. Even though some had their doubts, it was still a very effective ruse, to the point where some of the wrestlers didn't even know up until the reveal whether or not the injury was legitimate. It's always nice when you can't quite trust the people in charge of what they're saying. Cool. Never mind the fact the story didn't really require Rollins to be injured for it to be an effective cash-in. Not to mention his plan was extremely flawed if it relied on Punk winning the gauntlet match to become #1 contender and the title match as well. Would Seth have tried cashing in had Gunther retained? The shock of Rollins cashing in again made it all seem worth it as he and the Vision ruled the roost on Raw. Fast forward to October in Perth, Australia, when Rollins and Cody Rhodes were put in a pointless match for a vanity championship that required one of the world champions to lose for no reason. To add to the counterproductivity of it all, Rollins injured his shoulder for reals en route to winning the match, meaning he had to be written off again for shootsies this time. The title was vacated and wound up going back to Punk anyway, so I can't wait for them to circle back to this again next year once Rollins heals up. It's what they do, all right. Number 7. Sabu's passing and the blame game. It was a sad day in May of this year when Terry Brunk, known worldwide as Sabu, passed away at the age of 61. The hardcore icon was one of the most innovative and influential wrestlers of all time, and through it all went through life on his terms. Perhaps that's why some felt it only added to his legend when Sabu passed away only 3 weeks after his final match, WrestleMania weekend. At Joey Janela's Spring Break 9 in Las Vegas, Sabu battled the show's namesake in a no-ropes barbed wire match, a bout that was equal parts hard to watch and impossible to look away from. Featuring some insane cameos and run-ins, it was the ultimate tribute for the ultimate hardcore legend. That said, holy shit, this bump to the outside was scary. Shortly after Sabu's death, an interview that Janela had done just 2 days after the match had been published. In it, Janela described the circumstances leading up to the match, how Sabu almost didn't make it to the show, how Sabu's people gave him kratom just in order to function and get out there and wrestle. This description was not a great look for Game Changer Wrestling, though owner Brett Lauderdale later asserted that nobody forced Sabu to do anything on that day and that he appeared to be in good enough shape to perform, and that he was in good enough spirits both before and after the show had taken place, while Janela has said that a lot of what he described in that interview was hyperbole. The timing of Sabu's passing, plus Janela's additional insight, rolled up with an already negative perception some people have of GCW, along with people's misunderstanding of what kratom is or does, led to a lot of people calling for GCW's heads. Lauderdale and Janela were being blamed as if the match and or the kratom contributed to Sabu's death, though most would probably agree that his decades of hard living and punishing his own body played a far bigger role than any one match. It's hard to know all that really happened leading up to the match, and I do believe the mantra of Sabu does what he wants should be taken into consideration here. But even if you think GCW looked bad in their treatment of the legend on that night, to try and implicate them in the death of Sabu nearly a month after it happened feels pretty damn gross. Number 6. LOL NXT-TNA. One of the sillier things I've seen this year is this fervent online debate over who the number 2 promotion is in the country between TNA and AEW. First of all, it's really embarrassing for anyone to be arguing that particular topic, but even if you agree that there are rankings, and if you believe that TNA is the number 2 promotion, you'd have to admit that the number 2 promotion deserves better than to be treated like WWE's little sister. Whenever WWE works with another promotion, there is always an ulterior motive. I felt this in my bones when I first talked about the NXT-TNA partnership this time last year. I did consider it a net positive back then, though my optimism was cautious, and my suspicions were mostly confirmed as 2025 rolled on. And at the moment, TNA seems to exist as a benign co-star and a clear number 2 to NXT, a small nuisance that can basically be done away with by bonking them on the head. This year saw NXT stars winning TNA championships, but never the other way around. Well, except for the Hardys, but let's be real here, those guys, they're at the point now they're just going to win tag belts wherever they work. Even if they don't work there, it's law by now. We saw NXT poach talent like Jordan Grace and Joe Hendry, while TNA hasn't had nearly the same caliber of talent sent their way. And let's not kid ourselves, WWE has only been platforming TNA in the hopes of chipping away at AEW because that's all they care about. Please review entry 9 in this video for more information. Now, I don't want to downplay the positives of this partnership. I do think it's great that more wrestling fans are aware of TNA's existence. Look how it helped them draw at Slammiversary. Speaking of which, on a night that had already seen NXT eat TNA's lunch in the title match department, the obvious call was to have Mike Santana beat the Invader, Trick Williams, and win the world title in his home state for the glory of total nonstop action. Well, despite signs of a new era, it felt like the same old shit when Trick retained, throwing a wet blanket on an otherwise great night for the company. Then came Bound for Glory. Again, another great turnout, and Santana finally beat Williams to become the champ. Nice, albeit delayed. But a mere 32 days of nothing later, Santana dropped the belt to TNA long-timer Kazarian on his first episode of Impact as champion. That sure made the chase worth it. Despite these classic TNA screw-ups, the partnership has helped them get a new TV deal with AMC starting next year, which is great news for them. But here's my big issue with it all. Assuming WWE doesn't just buy TNA outright, if and when the partnership ends and those NXT talent leave the show, will they take the viewers with them? And if that's the case, what will TNA be left with? On one hand, I'm glad that TNA has been elevated in the last couple of years, but I believe it's come at the expense of its very identity, all in the name of undermining the entity WWE is really focused on. TNA was born more than 20 years ago out of the need for alternatives, and now it feels less like one than ever before. But just saying, it wasn't all unfair on TNA's side. For instance, the NXT wrestlers weren't paid any extra working those TNA shows, and they were just as liable to get injured. Just ask Ridge Holland, who got hurt while wrestling on Impact, only to get his WWE release while on the shelf, which is a whole other can of worms. Number 5, Jon Moxley versus Adam Copeland, Revolution. I do think, upon reflection, letting Jon Moxley hold the AEW title for as long as he did, in the manner at which he did, ended up working out. Not just because of the awesome payoff at All In with Hangman Page, but because it's also led to this really interesting angle that Moxley is currently on. That being said, boy howdy, I hated this match. I'm not sure if Moxley's title offense versus Copeland would have come off better had it not gone on last, had it not been forced to follow a trio of kick-ass matches that were going to make Moxley's win at the end go down a bit smoother. But even in a bubble, it was a match that was long on time and low on action. We knew both these guys were capable of better, but it just wasn't clicking. Then came the finish, a cavalcade of run-ins and swerves and false finishes, more befitting Roman Reigns than the former Dean Ambrose. Then to top it all off, Christian Cage chose this time to cash in his money in the guaranteed world title match. But Christian was less of a Seth Rollins in this scenario and more a Baron Corbin, taking the loss so Moxley could walk away the victor. The Death Riders had an ungodly death grip on AEW. After the initial debut, those first few months felt really out of control, and it was one of the more irritating storylines to follow in AEW because they played up on so many familiar tropes in unconvincing ways. Moxley's match with Swerve the following month was also frustrating, but I believe that first match with Cope was the last straw for a lot of fans. A boring match full of smoke and mirrors that was antithetical to everything AEW is all about. It's my pick for the worst main event of the year for AEW, and it brought down an otherwise strong pay-per-view. But at least they made up for it with a street fight a week or two later. Number 4, the Raja Jackson debacle. The problem with seeing guys like Travis Scott and Logan Paul and IShowSpeed and Jelly Roll getting all this premium airtime in these pay-per-view matches, it exacerbates a very bad and incorrect perception about professional wrestling, that anyone can do it. But this incident proves that not everyone is ready for the rigors of the graps. Back in August, Raja Jackson, the son of MMA legend Rampage Jackson, appeared for a planned segment at a Knox Pro show in Los Angeles. During his brief time in the ring, he slammed wrestler Psycho Stu to the mat, then proceeded to land nearly 24 unguarded blows to the head and face of his already unconscious colleague. A light worker he was not. By the time Jackson was pulled off the victim, Stu suffered severe injuries to his brain and skull and lost several of his teeth. And if that wasn't insane enough, in all this chaos, the match was technically still ongoing, and one of the guys Stu was wrestling actually pinned him, and the referee made the count? Jesus, at this point, who cares about protecting the business? The whole thing was escalated earlier in the day when Stu, apparently staying in character because of the cameras following Raja, had what he thought was a kayfabe confrontation with Jackson, who was A, not a trained wrestler, and B, unaware of what a work is. A little communication would have gone a long way in avoiding what became a needlessly over-violent incident, one that made everyone look bad, especially Raja and Knox Pro. It's worth pointing out that this is Hall of Famer Rikishi's promotion, but the Big Quiche wasn't actually present for any of what went on. Knox Pro was immediately stripped of its WWE ID designation, but weeks went by before the actual assailant suffered any consequences, as Jackson was finally arrested in September and charged in October. Jackson has pleaded not guilty to the battery charges, which could land him in jail for up to 7 years. It's a bold strategy considering he's on camera on his own kick stream moments before he gets in the ring, saying what he's gonna do.
Now I get a chance to get in the ring and do this and do some shit to him. And tell me to fake him, they say I can hit him for real. People think this shit's sweet. People think this shit's a fucking game.
Way more than too many flips or not enough selling or seeing your least favorite wrestler winning a title, it's this kind of crap that really makes the business look bad. Now someone's life is irreparably messed up and a bunch of indie workers lost their WWE pipeline over a stunt booking choice. Hope the viral hits were worth it. Number 3, The Rock rolls in and out. There's no question that The Rock's involvement in WrestleMania 40 helped make it the success that it was. Yes, there was that whole awkward, let me fight Roman, not you, Cody thing they had to work out, but once they did, the final boss character was really interesting and the payoff was tremendous. Following the Raw after Mania, Dwayne left the door open for a lot of possible threads for the year. Then at Bad Blood, when he showed up, held his fingers in the air and walked away, it had everyone speculating. Fast forward to the first Raw on Netflix, when Rocky essentially nullified his 2 most interesting threads and seemed to make peace with both Roman and Cody. It made even less sense once Rock did an about-face just weeks later and demanded that Cody sell his soul as we approached Elimination Chamber. Removing hindsight from the equation, the John Cena heel turn was easily the most interesting thing WWE did all year. And based on how it looked in the moment, it made sense. Cody wouldn't sell his soul to The Rock, and Cena, secretly desperate to end his final year on top at any cost, stabs the Codester in the back, aligns himself with the final boss. I could get into that. But from there, it appears there was some sort of backstage power play at work between The Rock and WWE Creative. Dwayne has gone on to say that he really did campaign for Rhodes to turn heel and that Cena was the second choice. Not only that, it's been revealed that The Rock was only brought in for the Chamber as a one-time thing to create buzz, meaning there was seemingly no long-term plan in place. Rocky even went so far as to say that the rest of Cena's story didn't need him around. But it kinda did. The whole crux of Cena's heel turn was based on what The Rock was cooking in those promos about selling your soul. He was basically a more jacked Vince McMahon corrupting one of WWE's most beloved stars. He didn't have to be there every week in the build-up, but you would think there'd be some kind of payoff at Mania, right?
Travis Scott is here!
Oh, fuck off! In for Dwayne Johnson this evening was Travis Scott, a rapper whose involvement in the entire storyline made zero sense outside of the fact that he's famous to people under 25. His interference made for a fun close to an already disappointing weekend. Can't wait for this to go somewhere. Oh, never mind, he started no-showing events too. Considering how Rocky pushed his way into the WrestleMania conversation the previous year, there's no doubt in my mind he tried some similar bullshit this year and it didn't work out, and so he left Triple H high and dry. It's a tough break for Hunter. I do think both men should get the blame, but Triple H should have had a contingency plan. With The Rock resembling a mere mortal again, I think it's safe to say we can abandon all hope of getting closure on his most recent run anytime soon. Whatever the reason The Rock failed to follow through as the final boss, the people who got screwed over the most in all this were the fans, many of whom paid top dollar to hopefully see the guy who was all over the WrestleMania marketing make an appearance in the main event. Well, I suppose one other guy got it really bad too. Number 2, the John Cena Retirement Tour. When John Cena announced that 2025 would be his last year as a wrestler, speculation ran rampant as to how his final 365 days would be treated, who he might face, whether or not he'd finally break the record. Much was made about the farewell tour before it kicked off, and when it was all said and done, I think that anything that was cooked up by another YouTuber or a podcaster or any random guy on Twitter would have been a lot better than what wound up happening. So first off, Cena didn't win the Rumble. A bit disappointing, but he made up for it the following month in a huge way at the Chamber when he sold his soul to The Rock. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, there was a story somewhere in there. Then Mania happened. Travis Scott showed up instead of The Rock, and WWE undid 3 years of Cody Rhodes' build-up in about 2 minutes, making him come off like the dumbest dumb who ever dumbed, allowing Cena to win and break the record. But without The Rock to work off of, bad guy Cena came off half-baked, less convincing than his first film roles. The fans didn't really want to boo him, and they really didn't want to see him team up with Logan frickin' Paul. As a matter of fact, for all the speculation over the young talent Cena could have worked with on this run, he worked so few dates that all he really had time for was to work with the bigger names. As far as the younger talent, there was Logan Paul and I don't know, Dominic Mysterio? Speaking of dates, Cena has come out and said he was willing to work as many as 200 this past year, only to be told no and limited to a few dozen appearances. Imagine the kind of stories that could have been told if it didn't feel like Cena was just speed running through the year. I thought TKO liked making piles of money. After months of trying to force the issue, going through the R-Truth debacle, wrestling Randy Orton, and forcing CM Punk to bend the knee in Saudi Arabia, which was hilarious by the way, a contrite Cena turned babyface again the week before SummerSlam vis-a-vis everyone's favorite, a weak apology promo. Then he lost the title back to Cody Rhodes in a match that was way better than their Mania affair, got fed to Brock Lesnar in a match that didn't help either of them, wrestled AJ Styles in Perth on the basis of, fuck it, they're not doing anything else this week, won the Intercontinental title to finally complete the set, then he promptly lost it. Wow, what an inspired run for this guy's final year, the first half of which they want you to forget ever happened.
Who cares?
Like, it doesn't matter.
Speaking of which, Cena's been saying a lot in his interviews in the weeks and months leading up to his retirement, mostly about how poorly planned and badly executed this year has really been in the grand scheme of things. But one of the goofiest things he said in defense of the heel turn sucking is that it takes 5 years for something like that to get over. Yes, as we all know, it took a good 5 years for the fans to really start to hate Hulk Hogan after Bash at the Beach 96. Look, turning John Cena heel was a lofty goal, and I respect the hell out of them for trying it, but it is so obvious they had no plan for what came next. A tournament was held to determine Cena's final opponent at Saturday night's main event, wrapping up with Gunther winning the sweepstakes. It's one of the flimsiest ways to set up a final match for John Cena, but his career didn't die in vain, it died in Washington, D.C. It was a performance befitting the legacy of Big Match John, who pulled out all the stops to prove his tenacity. But in the end, after all the unironic Super Cena chants and all the FUs and STFUs, yeah, Cole called them that again. That was pretty cool. All of his old tricks couldn't put the ring general away. At last, Mr. Never Give Up did the unthinkable and gave up, with a smile on his face, the weight of the world off his shoulders, a career well spent accepting of its end. It's kind of ironic that for all the dumb booking decisions fans have defended this year, it took this, one of Triple H's few good pieces of business, for fans to call for his head. I had no problem with Cena submitting in his final match to solidify Gunther as the new career killer. And the more I thought about it, I was fine with how he smiled at the end. And I'll admit, during that send-off at the end, the belt on his shoulder, the tribute package, I cried a little bit. It was super emotional. It was a great way to end the night and end his year. But God, you just know it could have gone so much better. John Cena's final year as a wrestler was Triple H's biggest test to date as the head of creative, a long-term angle that he controlled from start to finish. And for as story-driven as Hunter claims to be in the storytelling promotion, by the end it wasn't even really a story, just a series of disjointed individual moments. There were some good matches in there and he got to break some records, but for a guy who relentlessly held that company up when business was down, he deserved a lot better than what ended up happening. But like the rest of his career, he went out with a smile on his face, and I suppose you can't ask for much more inner peace than that. Okay, now, time to let the rest of it out. My pick for the worst part about wrestling in 2025 is WWE has lost the plot. I think about this a lot, how Steve Austin's terrible stunner to Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 38 seemed like the transition to a new era. The whole weekend symbolized WWE turning back years of negative sentiment and recapturing the imaginations of many fans who'd previously given up on them. Within months, Vince was gone from the company, and it looked as if a newfound commitment to continuity in booking was bringing the feeling back. It all peaked at WrestleMania 40, where the past, present, and future converged. A story ended in triumphant fashion, and with the recent TKO merger and the upcoming Netflix deal in 2025, WWE found itself in an incredible honeymoon period. Truly, the Paul Levesque era was off to a terrific start. Finally, the dawning of a new era with somebody in charge who got it. But then what happened 20 months later?
Paul Triple H Levesque. This is going to be interesting. Come on.
Oh, where do we begin? It didn't take very long for Triple H to piss away all the goodwill that WWE had built for itself in the wake of Vince getting the boot. In 2025, the H-Man's concept of long-term booking has devolved into overdrawn feuds that make the product dull and repetitive, an endless cycle of the same few people in the main event scene while the LA Knights of the world are seemingly punished. At least Braun Breaker still has his youth. But honestly, who cares how or why these shows are even booked? We all know the most important thing is who's gonna take credit for it all. Between all the interviews, the post-shows, and Unreal on Netflix, Papa Paul has made it abundantly clear that he is the God King responsible for all that goes on in WWE. And while it's obviously not much different than when Vince McMahon was in charge, Hunter is far more public about his involvement and his role, almost to the point of desperation, like he needs this validation for how important he is or he'll turn to dust. To him, it isn't Cody or Roman or Punk or Seth Seth or Brock, but the Game, who remains WWE's biggest star. Why else would his mug be front and center on the WrestleMania poster? He's retired. Who gives a shit what he's gonna do there? Last year, I took shots at WWE's press conferences, at Triple H's inability to answer any questions of substance, or to provide any quotes that didn't make him sound like a dull, cowardly egomaniac. But this year, he did a smart thing and finally nixed those post-show press conferences. Oh, I wonder why he did that. Then there was the way he handled John Cena's final year, which, as I alluded to, could have been booked better by a rabid wombat holding the pencil. And within that was the mess with R-Truth/Ron Killings. Speaking of truth, when's the last time a solo male black wrestler had a match on a main roster PLE? And for that matter, why didn't WWE do anything this year for Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month or Pride Month like they had in years past? Also, do they have to align themselves with a divisive and unqualified administration just because they're married into it? I'm just asking questions. If you can take away one thing about the Paul Levesque era, it's boy, what a smart guy that Paul Levesque is. He wants to take all the credit and jump right in to explain his decision-making skills instead of just letting the fans come to their own conclusions and enjoy the product as is, all while continuing the propaganda that nothing matters until WWE deems it so. Look at this Lucha Libre is no longer a sideshow bullshit. This company is so far up its own ass, Triple H can almost touch his pacemaker with his nose. Yes, I am reusing an old joke from Twitter, I stand by it. But anyway, moving beyond the booking and the propaganda, isn't it nice to see WWE's deep dive into gross corporatism with all these shiny logos spreading like weeds? The Prime logo on the center of the canvas at Mania 40 seems quaint compared to the NASCAR levels of sponsorships on every surface possible today. The canvas, the turnbuckle pads, the barricade, chairs, tables, ladders, pretty much everything except the wrestlers themselves, and even that doesn't seem too far off. Speaking of those PLEs, if you want to watch any of them in the future, now you're paying up to 3 times as much to see them on ESPN. Between that and Netflix for Raw, you need a lot of streaming services in order to keep up with it all. And there's no more classic library. Then there are the ticket prices, which to me is the biggest indictment against TKO. Now WWE, they're still drawing crowds, they're still able to sell these buco expensive tickets, so to me that's saying the bubble hasn't burst yet, but I doubt that's going to last forever. For me, the final straw was going to Las Vegas, paying $1,300 for 4 seats on night 2 of this year's Mania, getting the farthest back row possible, and then feeling ripped off to an unbelievable degree by what we witnessed that night. For comparison's sake, the seats we were able to get in Los Angeles just 2 years earlier for way less money, if this is what can be expected going forward, it's clear the current model is not sustainable. There is a crisis happening right now within Disney parks. See, there's a lot of parents my age who want to take their kids to the parks because their parents took them when they were kids and they want to keep that Disney magic alive in the next generation. But they can't because they're getting priced out. And as more families turn away from Disney, so too do all these future generations of potential Disney park goers who want to be brought back because of the nostalgic pull. I feel like that's happening right now with WWE. Tickets are getting more expensive. Following them costs more than ever before. And I think if you keep pushing people away because of that, it's not best for business. Oh yes, and they've cultivated a fan base that seems to despise the wrestling part of professional wrestling, who vehemently argue that WWE is the best and most correct form of it simply because it is the biggest and most successful brand, that everything else is utter dog shit and deserves to be wiped out of existence unless they work as feeder programs for WWE, that is. And to steal an old analogy, I like eating McDonald's now and then, and I can recognize it is the biggest and most successful fast food brand, but that doesn't make it the best. Like what you like. In the end, we all get heart disease. Taking a populist form of entertainment like wrestling and turning it into a luxury event is a culture crime worth dragging WWE and TKO over the coals for. This year, one TKO exec even publicly criticized Vince McMahon for his commitment to making shows affordable for families. Look, when you can make a guy with this mustache come off like a white meat babyface, you might want to reconsider your philosophy. I genuinely wonder what this means for the long-term future of WWE, and if TKO's pursuit of the almighty dollar will ultimately lead to the company abandoning the blue-collar audience that made them the juggernaut they are today. Let's face it, 2025 was a far cry from what WWE was giving us for the last 2 or 3 years. Maybe we've been spoiled this whole time, and this year is just an aberration. I hope things improve. I hope that they get to a point where they do some things or make some changes that will compel me to want to watch them again. Because it's not just one thing about them this year that sucked and turned me off to them, it was a lot of things. When you stop and take a whiff of the cursed bouquet, the whole thing stinks. That's why I think WWE's overall direction this past year has been the worst thing about wrestling in 2025. Now, those are just my opinions about the worst of the worst. What do you think belongs on the list for 2025? Let me know in the comments below. Before I go, do you know what hasn't sucked this year? You all, the Regretters. Thank you so much for making this another fantastic year as Wrestling with Regret enters its 13th year of existence in 2026. This has been one of my favorite years of making content, and I'm just so glad that you were all here to witness it. And I'm turning over a new leaf next week when I give you the best of wrestling in 2025 to kick off the new year. But until then, folks, I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.